Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Welcome back to EF Live. This is episode number 5 in our new webinar series over here at Empire Flippers. I am Jake Davis. I'm your host every week, and this week I have with me Mike Prugelman. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So, I guess, before we dive into everything, let's just start with a brief overview of what you can expect to hear today. So today we're going to be talking about e-commerce. So the first month of the show, the first 4 episodes, were in a series on Amazon FBA. The next month, the next 4 episodes are going to be in a series on e-commerce. And today we're going to be talking about explain the difference between e-commerce and dropshipping, and then we're going to be discussing dropshipping versus sourcing products. But before we get into all of that, Mike, can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what your role is at Empire Flippers?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for kicking that off, Jake. I'm one of the senior business advisors here at Empire Flippers. So I'm originally from the Bay Area, San Francisco, California. I've been with Empire Flippers for should be about 1.5 years now. So before working at Empire Flippers, I was working in the tech startup industry, like every trendy person in San Francisco does. And now I'm currently located in Manila. So I'm in the Philippines. It's 2 a.m., Jake, but I don't stop working really. No, I'm out here for a retreat that we're putting on, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to be out here and connect with a couple of our team members that are based here as well. So yeah, I mean, why am I credible to talk about drop shipping and e-commerce, that kind of thing? First of all, these are real glasses. They're not fakes. My vision is -2.5. Jake said that it makes me look more scholarly, so I think that
True.
helps. But no, I've helped facilitate the sale of, I'm guesstimating a little bit here, but I think conservatively, maybe around 100 businesses in the time that I've been at Empire Flippers, because we crank them out. And I've actually tried building dropshipping stores. Somewhat successfully. That's arguable, depending on how you define success. And I think like a buyer, I think anyone who's worked with me on a deal, you can probably vouch for me on that. I look at deal flow on other marketplaces. I'm very much drawn to entrepreneurship. So I can share my perspective as a buyer, or even things that might be important to a seller as you're thinking about starting or selling or buying one of these businesses.
So what exactly do you do? You're a senior business advisor. What do you do when it comes to dealing with the sale of a business?
Yeah, there's 2 sides of it. We work closely with sellers as their fiduciary and as their representative to get their listing out in front of the right potential buyers, and then to negotiate the deal. So on the flip side, and in tandem with that, I am managing a portion of our buyer pool, typically buyers that are looking for the larger deals at this stage. But I'm reaching out to these buyers, trying to match up their criteria with other listings that make sense. And when we do find those listings, I'm helping them with due diligence. I see my role as being one where my job is to present good, credible, and accurate information. Help buyers to understand that information with as little bias as possible, and then help them to craft a deal that considers all the risks that they've pointed out, or considers their liquidity or financial ability to purchase these listings in relation to the seller's financial goals, and create a structure for the deal that works for both parties. So that's in a nutshell how I see my role.
So when a buyer or a prospective buyer and seller get on a call to discuss potentially making a deal, you're the one who gets on the call with them to help them talk things out and come up with a deal that makes sense.
That's right. I'm the one that gets on the call with them. I'm the one that facilitates the transfer of information between those 2 people, between those 2 parties. I'm the one following up with you to make sure that we have momentum moving in the right direction, to make sure that, as a seller, we're not forgetting about potential buyers that are serious, and that as a buyer, we're staying focused on the deals that make the most sense based on their criteria. Yeah, and sometimes I'm the annoying guy who's giving you a call early in the morning because I haven't heard back from you, and I'm trying to get an answer and see if this is still something that you're interested in. Yeah, that's
Yeah, so for my part, if you have tuned into the previous 4 weeks of EF Live, you know who I am. I'm Jake Davis. I am a content marketing specialist at Empire Flippers, I guess is, what my official title is. And I've been doing the seller interviews with Empire Flippers since last summer. So if you have been listening to those, here's the face to that. I am a soon-to-be graduated electrical engineering student from the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And I'm just, I'm really, really excited about this show. One of my other hobbies, I guess you could use the word passion, would be streaming. I do like video game speed running streaming on Twitch. So when I was asked if I wanted to work on this show, it's just another excuse to work on coming up with overlays and transitions and just working on streaming in general. So, I mean, it's a really, really cool show. I'm really excited about it, and I hope that this information is extremely helpful to you all in the audience. And if you have any questions about us, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the show. So whether you have a question about me or Mike or EF in general or dropshipping, which is our topic, whatever you have a question about, let us know, because we want this content to be catered to you. And speaking of the content, so today we are going to be talking about dropshipping versus sourcing products for stores. And I guess the very, very first thing that we need to talk about, I guess first what we are going to talk about is differences between e-commerce and dropshipping, sourcing products, what exactly that means, and then what would be what are dropshipping versus sourcing. And I guess the very first thing to talk about is e-commerce versus dropshipping. Now, the big differences between e-commerce and dropshipping are, with e-commerce, you need to hold the inventory yourself. You need to order the inventory from the supplier, have it shipped to you, you hold the inventory, and then you fulfill the orders. With dropshipping, you work out some kind of deal with your supplier, and when an order is placed, you give the order to the supplier, they ship the order out to the customer. So you never have to touch the inventory, you don't have to hold it, you don't have to fulfill the orders. Mike, do you have anything to add right there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would add is that with e-commerce, to take it one step further, you are responsible for purchasing the inventory. It doesn't necessarily need to go to your garage where you then go to the post office every day and fulfill these items. A lot of people will enlist services from what we call 3PLs, or third-party logistics companies, whether that's Amazon FBA, who's essentially serving as your 3PL, or some other provider. You can get the inventory that you're purchasing from wherever you're purchasing it. Maybe it's China, as it often is in these relationships, and have it shipped there. And then they're essentially handling all the fulfillment when orders come in. One of the benefits of e-commerce is that you have a little bit more control over the margins. You can purchase in bulk, and you will get discounts for purchasing in bulk. And depending on the price of your item and your margins, that may well offset or considerably offset the cost of the 3PL service. And with drop shipping, you're not going to have as much control over the margins. You are going to pay for the item at cost, at whatever agreed upon price you have, when it's purchased by the consumer, and you're selling it for a higher price. So you do eventually have to pay for the item. The major difference, and part of the reason why I started a drop shipping business way back when instead of an e-commerce business, is startup costs. You don't need to float the capital to purchase the inventory that you would have to for e-commerce, right? I didn't have the $10, $15, $20,000 to purchase a significant amount of inventory that would make the e-commerce model work at the time. But drop shipping, I didn't have to purchase any inventory to start that business. So those are some of the considerations you give when it comes to inventory, and that, of course, is a key difference between these two business models.
Yeah, and to just reiterate something that he said, it's something to consider is the ease of starting one of these businesses. And, as he was talking about, when doing e-commerce rather than drop shipping, you are responsible for fulfilling the orders. Whether you do that yourself or you get a third party to do that for you, you are responsible for that. And then you need to purchase the inventory, and then whether you do it or someone else does it, make sure that gets fulfilled when an order is placed. With drop shipping, yeah?
Yeah. No.
Yeah,
You're
yeah, okay.
exactly right. I would just add one thing. I mean, in either case, you
Hmm.
may very well be responsible for handling the customer service. At least from a customer facing point of view, even with drop shipping, though your supplier is responsible for sending it out, when the customer has an issue, they're probably going to contact you. And it may actually be action items required of your drop shipper to rectify whatever situation occurred there. Product was shipped, it was broken, didn't get there on time, whatever it was. But it doesn't mean that you're absolved of all customer service
Hmm.
responsibilities.
So can you explain the concept behind MAP pricing?
Yeah, so MAP pricing or minimum advertised pricing is something that applies more specifically to drop shipping
Hmm.
businesses, and essentially, as a drop shipper, as the supplier of those goods who is shipping out to the end user who's purchasing through my website, if I'm the person who has set up this dropship website. Um, Anyone who wants to interface with me as the supplier, they can only sell the products at a certain minimum price, right? So basically, they're saying, okay, if I sell, um, glasses, this brand of glasses from the supplier, I can't sell it for less than $50, right? I can sell it on my site for $60, $70, and that will be my margin, but I can't go lower than 50. And the idea is that we need to uphold a certain level of quality and a certain level of equality across all of the competitors that are competing to sell this particular supplier's item. Now, some drop shippers are very good about enforcing MAP pricing. Anyone who has done drop shipping will tell you that um, there are a lot of different drop shippers. There are a lot of different tiers of drop shippers. Some will kind of accept anybody, and those people usually don't do a good job enforcing MAP pricing, right? Going on their client's website and making sure that they're matched up with their minimums or not going below that. The best suppliers will enforce them, but that doesn't mean you might not be doing business with both good and bad suppliers just because of the nature of how your business runs.
It's that kind of ties into the next point that we have, and that is that exclusivity is uncommon when dealing with, a drop shipping business. And what that means, as Mike was saying, there are a lot of competitors who are trying to sell the same products. And so this kind of pricing model, one works to ensure a level of quality, but then, as he said, also make sure that if you're trying to sell the glasses for $60, so you get a $10 margin, nobody's coming to sell them for 30, taking a hit, but trying to get a customer base.
And it's someone else's
Mm-hmm.
design, right? I basically found this product that some supplier provides, and I said I want that on my store. As opposed to e-commerce, you may very well come up
Mm-hmm.
with your own mold for the product that you want to create, or your own specific tweak to a design that the supplier already has a blueprint for, and that is now your design. You can actually go to the supplier with the e-commerce model in many of those cases and say, I'd like this to be an exclusive product. Nobody else can do this small thing to the glasses. Nobody else can tint just one lens. I think that would look cool. But anyways, no, but anyhow, there are opportunities when you get large enough with drop shipping. We've had businesses on our marketplace, businesses that have sold for between $1 and $2 million, where they were doing so much in volume and they commanded so much power and revenue for that particular supplier, where they were able to go to them and say, hey, I want my brand on these products, and I don't want you to sell my two best-selling products or supply them to anybody else who wants to do drop shipping. That can happen, but just generally speaking, and for you starting out, if that's what you're thinking about doing, if you're on the other end of this conversation, exclusivity is not something you're going to have starting out with drop shipping, whereas it may be possible to have that starting
Mm-hmm.
out with e-commerce, which means that you're going to be competing with other people to sell the exact same products, likely at the exact same price. So you're really competing
Mm-hmm.
on marketing.
And I guess just a question bouncing off of something you said is that exclusivity is not something that you have at first when getting into dropshipping. Have you seen where someone may get that exclusivity as they become an established player in that field?
Yes, but and I don't want to try to use numbers because I don't have the accurate figures, but I've only seen that
Mm-hmm.
once. I've only seen that once where a drop shipper, and it's the same example that I was using earlier. I think that business is being sold for about 1.8 million, but where he again commanded so much power and so much of the revenue for that supplier that he was able to negotiate that. But that was 2 years into the business, right? And he was crushing it right off the bat, growing month over month, year over year.
So now let's talk a little bit about what sourcing products is. First off, what is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, you have to source products for both dropshipping and e-commerce. I don't want to make this a conversation about semantics, but sourcing products just means going out and finding the people that are going to supply the products that you are going to sell. Whether you're going to buy those in bulk or you're going to buy them as they sell and have the dropshipper fulfill them doesn't change the meaning of the word sourcing. You're doing that in either case. But within the industry, I think people think about sourcing more specifically to e-commerce. Because sourcing is so core to the business and the margins, and you're going to be buying, hundreds and thousands of these products so that you can sell them. So in essence, sourcing just means going and finding the suppliers. Each, again, has different requirements for sourcing. I mean, drop shippers tend to work with more suppliers. They tend to be able to work with more suppliers because there's no cost to them to put up 10 more products tomorrow. They don't have to buy those 10 products and stock them. An e-commerce business can easily have as many products and as many suppliers as a drop shipping business. It's just not as easy. If I want to add 10 new products to my store, I've got to go get test products to make sure I want to buy them. I've got to go negotiate the right price with the right supplier. I've got to go have those products either shipped by air or sea. And then I've got to get those into the 3PL and explain to them how they're going to be, packaging them and sending these out to my customers that are my customers. So there's a much longer process that goes into being able to add more products to your catalog if you're coming at it from the e-commerce perspective.
So what would Alibaba be?
Alibaba is kind of like your catch-all, like your Walmart for drop shippers. You will find kind of the most generic stuff there. You're going to find things that a lot of other people are selling there, but you're going to be able to find pretty much everything of varying degrees of quality. Some things you might not be able to even find good quality items, but you're going to be able to find roughly anything you need on Alibaba. You're not going to have as personal of a relationship with the supplier, at least at first, but you are going to have the dashboard Alibaba to kind of help facilitate things like payment, things like tracking of inventory and processes there. So it does simplify things at first, but more experienced sellers, whether they're on the e-commerce side, the dropshipping side, the FBA side, typically have started to establish personal relationships or direct relationships either with sourcing agents or manufacturers directly.
So I guess the big question here is, if you are starting out, Mike, you're starting out, what route are you going to go?
Well, I have answered this question with what I've actually done, and I went the drop shipping route. But to tweak your question a little bit, I mean, if I had unlimited time and resources, which route would I go? My answer might be different. If I have limited time and resources, I would go drop shipping, and I would start with drop shipping. That doesn't mean I can't eventually move to an e-commerce model, right? If I'm starting from ground zero and I can start to generate some revenue, I can start to generate some profit that I put in my pocket while I'm doing my day job, whether that's Empire Flippers or whatever roles and careers everyone out there has. I can then use that capital to turn that into an e-commerce business. I'm sure that my supplier would love to sell 500 of these glasses to me, even though I'm buying them one by one, right? And I can go to them and say, okay, I'm ready to change my model up a little bit. I'm ready to actually handle fulfillment and not pass that responsibility off to you and have a little bit more control over the entire customer experience and my margins. So that evolution can occur, and I like that flexibility, by going the drop shipping to e-commerce route. In terms of scalability, and this isn't about getting rich quick, although, for me personally, I'm in it to make money. some people are maybe a little bit more about the
Mm-hmm.
mission than I am. I personally, I don't care what I'm selling. I'm that kind of person from a business perspective. But when it comes to e-commerce and scalability, I mean, if you can start there, a lot of the businesses that you see on our marketplace, this is a great example. You'll see businesses that are 1 year old, but they're priced over $500,000. And a lot of those businesses tend to be e-commerce businesses, again, because they had so much control. They had more capital when they were starting out, and they were willing to take a little bit more of a leap, right? It's all a risk reward thing, like everything is in business. But from an e-commerce perspective, you're going to be able to get that business off the ground, really cranking really quickly, because of how much control you have over the entire
Mm-hmm.
process.
And so I guess you really feel like it's a time issue. If you have more time to be able to invest, you would want to go the e-commerce route. And if you have less time, more limited time, you'd want to do drop shipping.
Well, I'd say number one is capital over time. Um, Time is always something that you're thinking about. But for me, the number one consideration on where you start is how much capital do I have? Because if you're expecting to be able to start any of these businesses with $0, it's not going to happen. Even $100. I mean, I think with any of these models, even if it's drop shipping, I think you need to expect to invest a couple $1,000 at the beginning to get it started. Whether that's in learning materials, whether that's actually in ad spend, whether that is in paying for the items that you have to purchase from the supplier first. Some people really like to sell high ticket items. Don't forget, if you sell something that costs $1,500, you've got to
Mm-hmm.
buy that, and you're not going to realize the profits right away, right? So every time somebody buys it, you need to pay for that product so that the supplier can ship it out, and you make the difference, the arbitrage, right? So capital is my first consideration when thinking about which way to go and which way to start.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a very, very good point, and that brings us over to, some of the pros and cons for both. And, I mean, like you said on that first one, maintaining cash flow required to hold inventory is a big factor. If you, as you said, the price of the item that you're selling could very well determine which model that you may want to go with, especially if you're starting out. If this is your first online business, you may not have the time, money, or resources to be able to maintain that cash flow that you will need to hold that inventory. So, I mean, that would definitely be something that goes into that choice. And then also dealing with the fulfillment and the 3PLs, like you were speaking about, it's again, I think that goes back to the time and experience that you have. Do you feel like that one's more of a time?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, these things can be outsourced, but going in order there, going back first to
Mm-hmm.
maintaining cash flow required to hold inventory. I want to hit on that because it'll lead in. But um, a lot of people get into this and they don't realize how difficult it is to forecast what kind of inventory they need to be holding on to, especially, it can depend on who you're working with. Most people are working with China because they can do things a lot cheaper. Their cost of labor is lower, all of the things, right? So if you're working with China, and you're cruising along for 9 months out of the year, and all the money you need to float to keep inventory levels healthy is, let's say, $10,000. In Q4, it's not going to be $10,000. You're going to need to have an excess amount of inventory to handle Black Friday, to handle Christmas. And then, what a lot of people either don't know or forget is that China and those manufacturers are basically going to shut down for the month of January because of the Lunar New Year. This is a big issue for FBA sellers. Anyone who's on FBA can relate to this. You basically need to stock up on inventory where you were normally buying it 1 month at a time for 3 months, in Q4 and beyond. So maintaining cash flow, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to look like this. It's not going to look like a straight line. So you need to be ready to handle those fluctuations. In terms of time spent dealing with fulfillment and 3PLs, it's certainly going to involve more time than simply emailing an order over to a drop shipper and say send it, right? You're going to be working closely with these people, how they package your item, how quickly they ship it out, staying on top of them, making sure that your invoices to them are paid and that suppliers are receiving the items. I mean, it is eventually your responsibility. Even the 3PL is handling it. It's going to reflect back on you and your sales. So it's going to be more time intensive. Again, all of these things can be outsourced and can be outsourced relatively cost effectively. But yeah, it's a larger time investment than simply saying, hey, dropshipper, send this out.
So if you are doing this, I guess as a theoretical person, but would you recommend outsourcing that labor there in dealing with the fulfillment and the 3PLs, or are you going to do that yourself?
Well, that's a great question, Jake. I mean, this is actually a conversation that we have when we talk about exit
Mm-hmm.
planning with a lot of sellers that are running these two types of businesses. There comes a point where the answer is always yes, you should outsource that. If your business is growing. I mean, if you are just not able to get your business beyond doing $1,000 every month, it doesn't make sense for you to outsource and pay, even if it's somebody, in a different part of the world, a couple $100 a month, because your margins, there just isn't enough meat on the bone. But with that being said, as the business scales, there's going to become a point where your time is just better spent elsewhere. I don't know how many hours that's going to take dealing with fulfillment and 3PLs. It could be a couple of hours every week. If you have a very large business, it could be a part-time job, a significant part-time job. But there comes a point where you want to outsource so that you can focus on other things. You can focus on growth, because when you're focusing on operations, I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's going to take away from your ability to grow the business. But from the Empire Flippers standpoint, from an exit standpoint, you're going to get a better multiple if the business is generating more revenue and profit relative to the amount of time that you as the owner put in. So if you can reduce the amount of time that you're spending by integrating another person into your workflow and having them take on that responsibility, it's also going to get you a better multiple.
So when talking about the multiple, though, that may also come at the cost of paying the person to handle that. If you want to get the multiple up by limiting your time, you have to pay someone else to do those tasks. Do you often
Yeah.
see that balancing out and being a plus for the seller?
Well, that I think depends on the size of the business. The smaller the business, the less that this is going to play into your favor from a valuation perspective. If you've got a business that's valued at, 2 million because it's doing 55, 60,000 in net profit every single month, then adding somebody and adding an expense for $300 to $500 and getting the multiple bump is actually going to be a big positive for you. But in either case, Jake, and I have this conversation with every seller, there's a difference between leverage and valuation that I think a lot of sellers or just people who are thinking about their exit strategy overlook. And I don't want to spend too much time and derail this from dropshipping and sourcing, but this is tied in, where people think that the only thing that matters is where the business is valued. And what's going to happen is you may have a high valuation, but there may be parts of the business that are not attractive to a particular buyer. I mean, remember that a lot of people that are buying these businesses, they're not looking for a full-time job. They're looking for a side project. They're looking for an additional income stream. And if it's going to turn into a significant part-time or even a full-time job, then they're going to price that into their offer. Maybe that they're going to price it in by decreasing the valuation, or maybe they're going to price it in by not paying you as much cash
Mm-hmm.
up front, and doing some type of seller financing offer where they want to pay 30 or 40% of the value of the business over the course of 12 or 24 months. So leverage is just as important, in my opinion, as the valuation.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be you kind of answered what my next question for you was going to be. One thing that I want to make sure that we touch on is including information in these shows that are pertinent to not only business owners and sellers, but also to buyers. So my next question for you was going to be, since you mediate these calls, mediate's probably the wrong word, but since you are on these calls helping to advise the buyers and the sellers, do you often see buyers be more willing to, would they be willing to pay that external person? Like, do they find that stuff attractive? And you kind of touched on that and said that a buyer is more likely to pay less for what would be, a part-time job for them.
Well, I think the other thing is you don't want to leave it up to the buyer to price out what that other person that's going to handle customer service, let's use that as an example, is going to cost, right? I'd rather have that cost off, and it's $300 every month for this guy, wherever they are in the world, to handle customer service for me, as opposed to a buyer coming in and saying, well, I don't know exactly how much it's going to cost, but my time plus my effort plus just what I'm pulling out of my head for the cost of this contractor that I'm going to hire, who I'm thinking will be US based, I'm going to say it's $1,000 a month, right? So you're giving up a lot in the negotiation to the buyer, and a savvy buyer is going to use that against you. I'm going to help shield you from that, of course, as best I can, but you can only do so much. And to a degree, buyers will be right, and it's hard to argue with that.
So now getting back to the list here, going down, can you talk a little bit about the control over margins that you have with these two different strategies?
Well, I mean, I think the high level control is maybe obvious to most people who are listening, but we'll highlight it anyway, and that's the discounts that you're going to get for buying in bulk. It's like that with anything. If I buy one pair of these glasses, they might be $50 a piece, but if I buy 100, maybe they're 40. If I buy 1,000, maybe they're 25, right? So, in this example, I don't know what it's going to be for every product, but by buying in significant bulk, I just decreased, the cost of goods by 50%. Now, then I have to worry about shipping and all of those things, but all of those things are also going to come down, right? The shipping cost for one item per unit is going to be higher if I'm shipping one item every single time I want to ship out to somebody, as opposed to getting one large shipment of 1,000 glasses all shipped to my third-party logistics center or to Amazon. If you were talking about FBA on previous EF Lives, it's going to be cheaper. So not only is the cost of purchasing from the supplier cheaper, but the cost of shipping is going to be cheaper. And that all is almost always going to offset. If you're buying in a large enough quantity and the business is large enough, is almost always going to offset however much you're paying the 3PLs. These 3PLs they're not that expensive. Let me start by saying that these are not going to break the bank. I think I've seen sizable businesses priced, in the six-figure range, low and high six figures, paying less than $1,000 to some of these third-party logistics companies on a monthly basis, right? And what they're getting back in the margin is it's paying for that and then some. So that's part of it. Again, control over the customer experience is a big thing too. How quickly they get the products, because now they're not having that item shipped from China, or maybe the drop shippers in the States, but it's within your control to go to the 3PL or to ship it directly from your garage if that's the way that you want to do it, and make sure that it's getting in the mail within a reasonable amount of handling time. And you can determine whether or not you want that shipped priority, or whether or not they get free shipping over $100 or whatever it is. You have so much more control, not just from a margin perspective, but from a marketing perspective, right? When you have to adhere to MAP pricing, and when they have the suppliers from a drop shipping perspective have all these terms over how they're going to send things out and when things are going to cost what, you have very little control over when things can have free shipping or certain promotions that you can run. So these things are all going to tree up to sales velocity. They're all going to tree up to your margins, which in turn is going to enable your business to be more scalable. And this is part of the reason why e-commerce businesses scale so much quicker.
And just another thing I want to add here, again, if you are just popping in here, make sure that if you have any questions, post them in YouTube or Facebook comment section, and after we get through all of our content here, we will be going through a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to get to us. Now back to this, let's talk a little bit about customer acquisition costs. Do you feel like, which one is better in that regard?
Well, I think it's always going to be e-commerce, again, because of all that control, if we're just talking about better. But they have different models that work for both of them. I think e-commerce, again, the control is going to go a long way. You're going to be able to do a lot more. I mean, drop shipping, there are a lot of models or courses that will teach you that the only thing that you need from a starting perspective and that you should be doing when you're starting out is just Google AdWords and Google product listing ads because it's cheap, it's efficient, and I agree with that for a lot of commodities. E-commerce, you can still start with that same model, with both you can still do paid Facebook traffic. You can still run a lot of different types of traffic to your website, but with drop shipping, the margins are going to be it's tough. It's tough to do that. It's tough to do Facebook because it's more expensive. And we have on our sheet of things to cover here. I'm going to go skip a little bit ahead, Jake, but Q4 is a perfect example of this. I've seen, and I think there may be a couple of businesses even on the marketplace right now, where the cost to acquire customers in Q4 is so high because the prices go up from an advertising perspective, because there's so much more traffic to buy products in Q4, that a lot of drop shippers actually aren't even able to keep up with those costs, and they essentially turn off paid marketing. And when you would expect November and December to be these drop shippers' best months of the year, they're actually their worst. And that's a perfect example of how you don't have total control over your own customer acquisition costs in some cases. You'll never have total control because you get to set the pay-per-click price from Google, but you can offset it by buying more inventory, right? Or shipping in a more efficient way, sea shipping as opposed to air shipping that you were doing, throughout the other 9 months of the year. So you have that control to adjust for that. And I think that's a big piece here in being able to keep the business profitable and to keep it from being seasonal for reasons outside of your control.
And touching on that, that kind of goes back to something that we spoke on at the start of this, but you don't have, in a lot of cases when you're drop shipping, you don't have exclusivity with the products that you're selling. So coming into Q4, as he's mentioning, if the price per unit goes up and you may need to cut advertising, I mean, there are other people who are selling these same products, and you're going to have competition. So I mean, what do you recommend going and trying to replicate the competition, or do you recommend trying to make your own plan and get ahead of the competition then?
I'm actually going to say neither of those two things. I actually recommend diversifying your traffic stream so you're not solely reliant on paid traffic, especially if you've been, let's say you've been through that last Q4 where you had to shut off advertising because the ROI just wasn't there anymore. Then what I would be working on is building out maybe an organic or a social channel to obtain traffic, so that during that time of the year, I'm getting some cheap traffic that can maybe prop up a little bit of paid traffic, even if I have to scale that back. So what does that mean? That means, adding content to the website, maybe adding a blog, maybe doing some research and seeing if all of these things are even sensible, depending on how competitive it would be. But if you can add another traffic source, and it might even be another paid traffic source, potentially, right? I mean, if you're using Google AdWords, maybe Bing doesn't increase by as much in Q4, or even throughout the rest of the year. And I look at that as another traffic stream, even though it's still paid. Now you've got Bing, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, maybe you're doing some stuff on Pinterest. I don't know what you're doing, but I would diversify it as much as possible to help account for that.
So I know the last point that we want to touch on here is customer service, but setting that aside real quick, just a question I have is, I mean, so eventually there's going to be, if everyone's selling the same products, not everyone, but if you're selling the same products as a lot of other people because people are getting them from the same suppliers, and eventually there's going to be a breaking point where it's going to be too difficult to get into the scene. I mean, or it may be more difficult to get into it because there's just already more competition. What do you recommend someone, if they do look at that and still want to get in, how do you recommend that they go about, breaking in there?
Well, I would recommend that you don't go and try to break in. Marketing, and especially drop shipping, but e-commerce as well, all of these business models, I mean, you've always got to be testing. And if something doesn't work, it doesn't work. If you try a niche and it's just too competitive, don't go dumping money into that thing. I'm telling you, it's not going to work out. If you can identify if an opportunity is a good opportunity, like for example with drop shipping, pretty early on. you're going to set up your Shopify store, you're going to get a domain, all this stuff, maybe you get a logo made. This stuff's going to cost you $100, $50. It's not going to cost you that much. You're going to put in some time to get run some paid traffic and see if you're getting impressions. And that's your test right there. In fact, Google and Bing, they're going to give you a free $100 when you set up your Shopify store or your WooCommerce store. They're going to give you a free $100, and you can use that money. You can make it go pretty far with testing to see if you're actually getting traffic. And if the cost is just too high, I mean, again, there are a lot of courses. We can recommend some of them. I don't know, maybe those will be some of the questions, but there are a lot of good resources out there to help you understand this data. And you're going to know very quickly that this is a money pit, or that there's an opportunity here. So I really, with dropshipping especially, because I know that a little bit more intimately, but the same thing goes for e-commerce. And I think the same thing can be said for FBA. I know people and friends of mine who have been really high on a product, bought way too much inventory for Amazon or for e-commerce, and they basically had to burn that inventory or sell it off at a really, really cheap price, right? So my answer to that question, again, Jake, not to, you gave me A and B, and I'm going with C.
And that's okay. That's okay.
Is cut ties if it's a loser, And one more to go one step further. There are a lot of people in this industry, whether they build content sites, dropshipping stores, e-commerce stores. They'll start 3 of these products at once, knowing 2 of them are going to fail, right? So there's a reason that they do that, and they identify the winners and they cut the losers.
So I want to touch on that a little bit later, but for now, let's finish up on our last point here, which is customer service. So, I mean, how do you feel like that plays into the question here, the debate?
Well, I think a big piece of it just has to do with, from when you're thinking about which business model is right for you, you should think about what things that you want to do. And both of these businesses have customer service requirements. Some people, they go just to use the whole, landscape of potential business models. Some people choose to build content sites because they don't want to deal with suppliers. They don't want to deal with customers, right? Obviously, if you're going in the e-commerce or the dropshipping route, you're willing to deal with customers on some level. So to hone in on those 2 models, you're going to care a lot more about the customer journey from start to finish if you start an e-commerce business. And this is something that the company that I worked for when I was working in tech, I was working for a tech startup that was called Zen Payroll, that is now called Gusto, and they really cared about the customer experience. They wanted to control every aspect of it, and they wanted to make it awesome and perfect, right? And maybe that's you. And for certain products, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I would like to do that too. But maybe you don't want to put in all that time to craft the customer experience and to oversee it at all times. In that case, if you just want to, or not want to, but if you're just more willing to handle the top level, hey, where's my tracking ID? Hey, does this product do X? Then dropshipping is going to be a lot more straightforward. So it's a preference.
Yeah, and that is because of the fact that, as you were touching on earlier, e-commerce is more of a customizable thing. You can really tweak these products and try to sell something that is your own. And with dropshipping, you're not really doing that. So, I believe that's why it goes back to that whole, with dropshipping, the questions are going to be much less personal. Yeah, personal. They're going to be much less, about what you're doing specifically, and more just, hey, do these glasses have little hinges? I don't know,
Exactly.
So,
it's a good thing I wore these. They get the
I know, they're just perfect.
Yeah.
Whenever I try to, do something like that, if I'm on the phone or whatever, I almost always settle on a pencil, just because I look around my desk and that's the first thing that my eye catches.
I hear you.
But yeah, so I guess, again, guys, questions, whatever you may have, but, let's talk a little bit, before we get to Q&A, let's talk a little bit about a listing that we have here that we want to talk about. This is an Amazon FBA business, which the FBA stands for Fulfillment by Amazon. and it's in the outdoors niche. It's making $12,971 per month in net profit, $3,267 per month. Or, I mean, sorry, 12,971 in monthly revenue, and 3,267 in net profit. And this is built on a 12-month average. And one reason why I want to talk about this listing today is, and this goes back to a few minutes ago when we were talking about you can add a bunch of products at the same time to see what sells. This is what I meant when I wanted to talk about this. This business does something super well, but it is a seasonal business. And so, during this one season, during this one time of the year, big peak. And then for the rest of the year, it's much lower. And, the thing I want to just give my 2 cents on, as a potential buyer, for this, you could look at this and think, okay, well, this big peak is going to be consistent. But one thing that could happen would be, I could try out different products to fill in the other gaps. I mean, what do you think of something like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing that's good about this business is it's got 3 years worth of data. And when you have a seasonal business, I think it's very important to have year-over-year data. And I think, seasonal businesses, a lot of people fray away from them, and there may be opportunities to get favorable terms on those types of businesses, whether that's the valuation or whether that is the terms of how that's paid back for with some creative financing or seller financing that we build into the deal, because there's not as much competition for those. But I think it's really important to analyze the year-over-year data. You were kind of alluding to this, Jake, but if it's seasonal every year in summer because it's an outdoor product, and I can see that these months where I do 60% of my annual revenue, which maybe that's May through August, I can see that every year that's increasing by 20% or 30% or whatever percentage, or it's maintaining, then I think that that's a solid business. And if you're just looking at the listing page for this business, you're only going to have 1 year of data. But I'm not digging into the profit and loss statement. I want to keep it, at whatever information everybody on this that's watching this video has at hand. But with that being said, I think that's a good way to look at a seasonal business and kind of determine whether or not it's sustainable, right? That's the biggest fear that anybody, I think, has. It's buying any one of the businesses on our marketplace, is that it goes to zero over time. But if I can see a trend that's growing or is sustained, and I have 3 years worth of data like I have for this business, I can find some peace of mind that this is able to be replicated, that I can do it with the seller's training, and of course that I can grow it. But of course, we always encourage you to talk to the seller and establish a relationship to better understand how.
So now we're going to transition into our Q&A session. And seriously, guys, we're going to be here for a few more minutes. We're wrapping up, but any questions you have, feel free to get to us. Before we check that out, though, one question I have and want to touch on, and this is based off of a point you made earlier. What are some of these tools that you mentioned earlier that you might want to use to help you get started with your businesses?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not an affiliate. Let me start by saying that. Not getting any affiliate
yes.
like kickbacks or anything for these.
Totally. And we just want to mention anything like that we do talk about. Like we really want this information to be helpful. So we're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to recommend, so we can help you.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Dropship Lifestyle course, dropshiplifestyle.com. We've actually got a module on Dropship Lifestyle that I think is well, our module is great, but their course is really in depth. There are things that you can even take from this course that aren't necessarily just applicable to dropshipping, like their paid traffic strategy, for example, can very well be applied to any commodity-based, physical product business, I think. Well, any might be a stretch, but most. This is definitely a course that I would recommend. There's also a brand new kind of jack of all trades kind of course, or maybe I shouldn't put it that way, but it covers a lot of different areas of how to get traffic, whether it's organic, whether it's paid, which I think is important because I was talking about diversity earlier, and that one's called The Lab. There's a friend in the industry and the people that he works with, Matt Diggity, who put this together. We can put the link in the description after we conclude this video, Jake. But it's thelab.mykajabi.com. It's a great course that really covers a lot of different information, everything from organic traffic to paid. I mean, it's really in depth. So I think these are both good courses that will help whether you're looking at e-commerce, and that course does have an e-commerce side to it. And Dropship Lifestyle is kind of the number one for all things dropshipping. In terms of other tools, there's a lot of little things that you can be using, heat maps and things like that to see where your customers are going. Start with these. They're going to cover a lot of those tools in their courses. That's where I got a lot of the ideas for tools to use on my own business. I do also recommend Shopify for building these stores. I think it's the most simple and straightforward. There are other ones that you could go with. There's WooCommerce that you can build on top of WordPress. There's BigCommerce. I think Shopify is the most simple and straightforward of all the major players. Has the most support, has the most plugins. Unless you're going to build a custom CMS or something for your website, I think Shopify is probably the way to go.
So John Rhodes asks, what is the best resource for finding freelancers to help with handling the 3PL?
Yeah, good question. Well, the most common answer would be go to Upwork. And Upwork, I think, is a great place to start. I think there's the best way to go about doing it, in my opinion, is to join Facebook groups that are helpful and specific to your niche, your audience, what you're doing, and just to be social and to ask people for recommendations. And you'll find people recommending other websites. There's I forget the name of it, but there's either like remotework.ph or jobs.ph. There are a lot of good sites in the Philippines. One of the biggest English-speaking nations, right? Very important for customer service and very cheap labor. But I would encourage you to get involved in a community that is specific to, again, your niche and your business model, and just simply to ask there. There are people who are very helpful there, and there are people who will probably be looking for more opportunities as the virtual assistant or as the customer support assistant that will be a part of those groups and will reach out to you. I think that's a great way to do it. Upwork is a good backup and a good kind of base for finding these people. I might liken this to Alibaba versus going direct to a customer, to a group. Other ways, there are certainly some other networks that exist out there, but those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah, and Upwork, if you're unfamiliar with it, is, you can go on there and you can try to find someone to handle any job that you need. So you just can, look for, you can find what you're looking for, find someone who has that skill set and is able to help you out with that kind of work. So Drew asks, what are typical profit margins with dropshipping versus sourcing?
That's a tough question, Drew, and a good one. But with FBA, usually, it's different. It's different based on the product and based on the niche, right? If you're in like home and kitchen, you're going to be scrounging for margins. But just generally speaking, again, take this with a grain of salt. It's not true for every single product, every single niche. But with Amazon and with e-commerce, where you are able to have a little bit more control, usually buyers that are pretty experienced are looking for margins in the 30% range. That's kind of like the benchmark that's being used. So then naturally you adjust that down for drop shipping. I think drop shipping, you're probably fairly happy and comfortable with 10 to 15%. And again, I'm kind of just throwing out numbers based on my experience. But if you were asking me, which I guess you are in this scenario, I would put those at the benchmarks for what is good, or what is going to be, again, I'm going to use the word
Hmm.
scalable.
So Drew also asks, if you had $15,000, would you attempt to dropship or private label?
I think I would go the route that I mentioned earlier, and start with drop shipping, because that is plenty of capital to test a lot with drop shipping, and then slowly kind of parlay that into e-commerce and sourcing a specific product that I'm going to build the business around. And don't forget, and do know that if you look at our marketplace, you will see businesses that are listed. Their monetization method will be drop shipping and
Hmm.
e-commerce, and they've followed a trajectory. In many cases, they were drop shipping. They said, wow, revenue. Let me go source those either from the supplier I'm already using, or find other suppliers, maybe
Well,
diversity of
that was
suppliers in
that.
different.
Hey, Mike. Sorry, my that was so weird. My computer just like completely spazzed out. I missed like that entire answer.
Oh,
Um,
oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, I'll give a paraphrased version of it to a degree, but I would go the route that I was mentioning earlier of going from drop shipping and parlaying that
Hmm.
into private label. You've got a lot of money to play with, a lot of money to test. I was talking a little bit about the 80-20 rule that we all learned in marketing school, which essentially means that 80% of your revenue comes from about 20% of your products. Why not take just that 20%, bring that in house, have control over the customer experience on those 20% of products? You know they work, you know the formula, and now you can have more control. You're going to get better prices on the margins. Your 3PL, you're only paying for them to fulfill those items, which are now already stateside, right? As opposed to them being in China and all that shipping time that comes with that if you're drop shipping them. I would go that route. And I was just saying, to kind of really drive it home, that a lot of the six-figure businesses that we have on our site, you'll see their monetization model is e-commerce and drop shipping, because it doesn't make sense for them to buy all of the products and bring them in house. It's just not profitable. So when you can test in this way, it really helps you to scale the business in a way where you don't
Hmm.
burn your capital.
Yeah. It also depends. I mean, it really. I mean, it depends a little bit on how expensive the products are as well. If the products that you're going to be selling are more expensive, then buying them up front may be less of an option. Um, so you may not want to go that route. But so Mike Swig asks, any recommendation for companies that handle paid traffic? And I guess by
Any
yeah.
recommendations? Um, hmm, let's see. Well, I think, again, if starting out, it's pretty important for you to understand how you're reaching your customers. I want to start by saying that there's actually I'm going to give a shout out to an ex-employee of Empire Flippers, Vincent Wynn, who started his own business, which is called Growth Ninja. Growth Ninja, I think he really knows what he's doing. He's spoken at a couple of conferences that I've been to. And if you're looking for somebody to test and build a paid marketing strategy, I think Vincent is a great guy to go to. He's at the top of my list for sure, especially for all things Facebook. If you're looking for somebody to set up something on the Google side, I mean, I still think Vincent might be a good guy for you. But I think when you can play around with smaller amounts of money and still make a large impact, and Google and Bing and things of that nature being a lot cheaper than Facebook in most cases. So there are exceptions to every rule. But I think it's important for you to learn how to do that on your own. It's not rocket science. And that's going to tree up to your keyword strategy, and how you create your listing pages for your products and things of that nature. I would probably do that on my own using some of the courses that I've recommended. Those courses are really, really good. You can literally just follow them A, B, C, D, E, to create a profitable Google AdWords strategy or Bing strategy. And if it doesn't work, maybe it's time to consider canning this idea and going for
Hmm.
another niche.
And I mean that kind of ties into my my big piece of advice is make sure that you're not burning money with this. Test the waters, and and find something, like we spoke about before, there's a lot of competition in these areas. So make sure that, you can find an area that you are making money in, and you're not just going to try to get in somewhere and burn everything that you have. Aaron Patel says, what are the better ways to promote items on Amazon? And I guess just from what I've seen with doing, speaking with every seller, most of the sellers that I do interviews with who are selling an FBA business, they don't do a ton in advertising outside of Amazon. So outside of Amazon pay-per-click. So I guess if I had to, say one thing, really utilize Amazon's own advertising and try to rank really high for the keywords within Amazon.
Well, pay-per-click is like the lowest hanging fruit by far. Part of the reason why you go to Amazon is to take advantage of their traffic, right? I mean, it's not just because they're handling fulfillment. It's because you've got the best converting website, arguably, I don't know of any ones that are better in the world, maybe, with just an insane amount of traffic flowing through their SERPs, right? So if you're going to Amazon and you're not taking advantage of PPC, then either you have a product that people are searching for and no competition, which is hard to believe for me on Amazon, or you're not doing something right. PPC is by far the lowest hanging fruit. You should be optimizing that. The Amazing Seller is a great podcast, and FBA Empire is a good place to get more information and resources on how to do that efficiently. But what are the other ways to promote items on Amazon? There are several schools of thought. My school of thought is you eventually want to drive everything back to Amazon, but Amazon controls the customer experience. And again, I don't want to get too hung up on this because we should be focusing on e-commerce and dropshipping, and maybe this will roll over. But let's say you go and set up your own e-commerce store via Shopify, and you're thinking, should I sell my own products and handle the fulfillment myself, and maybe the margins will be better? Or should I just take the traffic that I get to my website and push it right back to Amazon? In most cases, I think it's the latter. And the reason is because Amazon at this stage is your core source of revenue. And what's going to determine rankings and growth and you maintaining those rankings in Amazon is at the highest peak of what's important, sales velocity. So if you can just take organic traffic because people are reading your blog, going to your website, and then clicking on your products, but it's taking them to your products on Amazon. Or you're running paid Facebook traffic to get signups to your newsletter so that you can retarget these customers via email marketing. But at the end of the day, you're then pointing those people back to Amazon again. You're maintaining that sales velocity or even increasing that sales velocity. And now you have multiple traffic sources. Now you're not just reliant on PPC. Now you've got Facebook going, you've got organic going in this example. I think Facebook is kind of the next natural evolution from PPC. But I think it all points towards a website that you then create can control the customer, right? If you direct the customer to your website first, you can capture their information. You can't do that on Amazon. That's a big piece of it. And then you can build out other traffic strategies around that.
Are there any questions that we've missed, Mike?
I want to hit this one. Mehdi asked about what are the financing options. I think that's a great question. I'm going to split that into two questions, Mehdi, and talk about financing with suppliers and how you pay for your inventory, and then financing for, just at a high level for buying some of these businesses. Let's start with the former and work linearly here. The terms that you're going to get with your suppliers are going to change over time. The longer and the better your relationship is with the supplier, the better the terms are going to be. Starting out, with drop shipping, you're always going to have to buy the item up front. But if you're going the e-commerce route, starting out, maybe you have to pay for the entire order up front, or you have to pay 50% up front and 50% when it gets to whatever warehouse, Amazon or your 3PL. Going forward, you may be able to actually have 30 days worth of credit. They'll call it net 30, where you don't even have to pay right when you make the purchase order. And the supplier will produce those items, they'll ship them out. You'll pay for a portion of the cost within 30 days. Maybe it's 100% starting out. Maybe over time that works its way down to 50%, and then you're able to pay another portion of that cost when it hits some other milestone. It's on the ship to be delivered over to your warehouse, or it actually reaches your warehouse. So the terms are negotiable for how you pay for that inventory, just like they are for how you pay for a business, right? Most of the deals that we do over 500,000 don't just look like somebody saying, "Oh, your business is listed at $500,000. Here's 500 grand," right? Usually, it's somebody coming in and saying, "Well, I can't get an SBA loan approved for this business, maybe because there aren't enough tangible assets or whatever it is. But I'm willing to pay you, Mr. Seller, $400,000 up front. That other $100,000 I want to use to leverage so that you have skin in the game to continue providing me support, and so that I can have a little bit more working capital for inventory, for growth, for all things required to run this business. Maybe that's pay employees, etc. And so that I know that I'm going to get that support from you while I'm still paying you back. Now you're shouldering a little bit of the risk in case the business goes to zero. So there are ways to be creative with sellers. There certainly are ways in some cases, in cases where the business is old enough, where the business is concrete enough to obtain SBA lending to actually purchase some of the businesses on Empire Flippers, if that's what you're thinking about, Mehdi. But that's something that we can also talk about offline if you want to reach out to us.
Obviously, as a seller, the best case scenario is to get 100% cash offer. Hey, here is that $500,000, but sometimes that's just not possible, So, yep. Mike, as the business advisor here, when you go into these meetings, what's your big piece of advice here?
My big piece of advice, I think, a lot of due diligence you can do before the call. My big piece of advice is that when you go into a call with a seller, which is I think what you're asking about here, Jake, is the goal of the call is not solely to understand how the business runs. The goal of the call is also to understand how much training and support is this seller really willing to provide. Are they, for lack of a better term, an asshole that I don't want to do business with? Is it not going to be a good working relationship with this person? These things might seem obvious, but they all tree up to where I'm going, which is what kind of terms can I get from this guy, right? I've had plenty of conversations and conversations recently and done deals recently where the seller told me I'm not willing to accept less than 95% of where my business is listed today. And then a buyer comes in who really builds good rapport with that seller. The seller likes the buyer. He trusts the buyer because the buyer has maybe some experience, or maybe he sees a little bit of himself in that buyer if the buyer is new. That's actually happening right now. And suddenly the seller is super open to willing to do a deal, and he wants to work with that buyer. In some cases, I've even seen sellers do deals that are less good for them financially because they wanted to work with one particular buyer. So I think what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of intangibles other than how do you handle fulfillment? What's your relationship like with the supplier? Those bland questions. Going into the call with an agenda to build a relationship with the seller is important, not just to, again, just to reiterate, to understand what kind of terms they're even willing to give you, right? Is this guy only going to support me for 30 days? This is my first business. I need at least 90 days. You know what I mean? Not just to understand that, but to position yourself to get a deal that works for you, right? We're not really the type of marketplace where we're not bidding and bartering. We're not eBay specifically where it's like I bid 100, I bid 101, I bid 102, right? We want you to come in and value the business accurately based on your own metrics and your own criteria. But we also want to help you get a deal that works for you based on, again, the operating capital required to run the business, how much money that you have, how much net profit a business needs to be creating for you to be worth your time, right? So these things are all important in deal making. Everything that goes into doing due diligence, I can help you with. We can make sure that you get. And if you don't get something, just walk away from the deal, right? The great thing about deal flow is that somebody said this. This isn't a Mike Predelman saying, but you can you don't only get 3 strikes, right? You can wait for the perfect pitch. You can take 100 pitches before you swing the bat, right? And I might not want to do 100 calls before we get to a deal, but if we have to, we have to. So I would encourage you to build that relationship and go into the call with that kind of agenda.
I mean, I think it's just goes back to something that I've been told many times is, be friendly, because people want to do business with people that they like and are friends with. So, Mike, thank you. I mean that's just kind of saying, in layman's terms, what, how I would take that is try to build a rapport and try to go into it with the mindset that we're trying to figure out all the terms and everything beyond the, so is this e-commerce or drop shipping? What is the relationship with the supplier? Beyond the, black and white questions, what are the nitty gritty? And, that's the stuff you should be going into for these calls. Mike, thank you for being on with me. I hope you thought this was fun. I feel like we had a pretty good show today.
No, I did. I mean, I'm looking forward to the next topic, and when I get to hop back on, we've got like kind of a little rotation going here. But no, I'm looking forward to it. Everyone who was on, who was watching live, appreciate you guys being on, and look forward to maybe fielding more questions from people who watch this video later.
Always, we want to help here at Empire Flippers. We want to help. So if you have any questions and you post them in YouTube, we'll try to get, like comments after the video. We'll try to get to them. If you have any questions, we're going to be doing e-commerce and dropshipping for the next, few weeks too. Any questions you have, bring them next week. We'll answer them. We'll get to them. We really want to help. We will be live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And like I said at the start, this is your guys' webinar. So if there's a topic that you guys, if there's a topic that you are wondering about, feel free to bring it up, whether it be in comments after or during the show. So thank you all so much. Again, I am Jake Davis. I'm going to be on every week. Today I had Mike Pregelman, dude. Pregelman.
Yeah, it's a tough last name.
I just got choked up. But yeah, Mike was on.
It's because I took the glasses off. You were like, oh man, he's actually.
I was like, oh man, the scholar is gone. I don't recognize him. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching and asking questions, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Mike, any last minute words?
No, thanks guys, and if you want to get in touch and you want to have a conversation directly, just reach out to any email you can find at Empire Flippers and ask for me, and happy to hop on a call.
Have a fantastic day.